On this episode of The Michael Chacho Show. Okay. This episode is going to be really interesting, I think. At least for me, I think this is the most honest I'm going to be. Maybe. I don't know. But this is going to be my most vulnerable, perhaps. I don't know. What am I doing? What am I doing? Why am I doing this? I've had a long history with these types of apps and websites, especially growing up gay where I'm from, and at the time too, gay wasn't really as talked about as it is now or accepted as it is now. So you know, you never really have a normal gay dating experience, and I mean, granted, whoever does. I wasn't hiding anything per se, but you know, gay people were far and few in between, and I didn't really have a lot of options, I guess. That's weird to say, like, options. That makes me sound like I'm promiscuous or something. But my point in general is, like, you don't really have, like, a safe space to express yourself. I can remember the first time I used a website for a casual hookup. Oh, this is so embarrassing talking about. But no, I'm doing this for science. Back in the day, and now I'm really aging myself because back in the day there was a section on Craigslist where you can use it for casual hookups or missed connections. And I met some really sketchy guy in some sketchy part of town, and it was the weirdest 20 minutes of my life that I'll never get back. I mean, it is what it is. It's an experience. It's just funny looking back on it now, like the strange obstacles and hoops I had to go through just for a little bit of attention, I guess. I was that desperate at the time. Suffice it to say, I was not looking for anything long-term at that time. And I don't think you look for anything long-term on Craigslist unless you're just looking for regret. But I learned from it, and it was interesting. It was exciting, I guess, at the time. And that was kind of the beginning of a long series of weird and strange and desperate ways of getting attention, I guess. You know, especially being that young and looking for a lot of validation at that time. And I was in need of a lot of validation, especially for being gay. And I had built up all these expectations of what being gay is like. And through the years of trying all these weird websites and apps, I realized that those expectations were completely unreliable. I can remember the next year, I was 20 years old, and that was the first year that I finally got my first smartphone, and I felt like I was like the last person in college to have a smartphone. And it was an iPhone, no less. And just guess what the first app I downloaded. Yep. I went through the Grindr games. Yep. At the ripe age of 20 years old, I was finally introduced to the world of Grindr. Now, up until now, I had still hung on to this grandiose belief and this expectation that gay people were accepting and loving, and that love always wins, and that we're all equal. That was all shattered when I went through Grindr. I learned a lot of things on Grindr. I learned a new word for racism is just a preference. I learned the meaning of being a fat femme Asian. I learned what it's like to talk to a headless torso who will block you anyway. At one point, I was a headless torso. I went through that phase too. I learned what it's like to be mask for mask. And I'm only into straight acting guys only. Like, if you can tell that you're gay, I'm not into that. I got to the point where I just knew that people didn't want Asian, so I ended up covering my face. So I was also a headless torso. And I thought that maybe if I could just rely on my body, that I could find someone who was desperate and lonely as I was at the time. And granted, I was actually pretty fit back then, so I think I had a pretty good body. I wasn't as fat. It was horrible. You know, I was just so desperate for attention, really. I was so desperate for validation. I just wanted to talk to anyone and see if anyone had a sexual interest in me. And it didn't work. It wasn't working, actually. And then I thought for a while, well, maybe it's just where I live. Maybe I just need to move somewhere else. And maybe then I will flourish as a homosexual. And that was also wrong too. I've been all over the country to different pride events and, you know, different vacations trying to use Grindr and all those apps, and honestly, it kind of still stays the same. I've been all over the world too. The racism still exists. The preferences still exist. But, you know, that stuff doesn't bother me now. I get it. We all have our preferences, and, you know, it is what it is. But I prefer not to use these apps anymore. But I can't lie or deny that I still have an itch to go back on Grindr just to see what happens. And maybe this time around it'll be different, because I might make it into an episode. That was so corny. Who writes this stuff? Thank you guys so much for tuning into the Michael Chacho Show. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe.